We're live.
Yay! Thanks, Alex. Hi, all. Welcome to Albemarle CiderWorks. We're a little empty here by ourselves in the tasting room, but Chuck and I are here to talk to you today a little bit about Arkansas Black, which is Chuck's favorite. We are not socially distant, but we live in the same household. Chuck is my uncle. So we are here to do this together with you today. I know some of you guys had purchased our tasting bundle, so if you have that ready, we've got glasses. We're going to start with the first cider, which is the Arkansas Black from 2015. It'll be in the smaller bottle. Let's get started on that. And Chuck can talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go into talking a little more about cider in general, and then Chuck's philosophy on cider as well.
So, Arkansas Black, yeah, I drink it all the time. It is one of my favorites. I like a lot of ours. I like a lot of different ciders, but this one, well, first off, we do a lot of single variety stuff. This would have been a single variety except for one minor deficiency. The acidity in the Arkansas Black juice didn't really measure up to my palate, so we kind of augmented it with a more acidic variety, namely Newtown or Albemarle Pippin. So it's 75% Arkansas Black, 25% Albemarle Pippin. There have been years since we did the first one where the Arkansas Black may have measured up, but we kept the same blend, and it's always been, to me, one of my favorites. So this one, 2015, that means the apples were picked in the year 2015 and processed during the fall and winter. We usually press this apple later. It's a hard apple and store as well, so we usually press it towards the end of December, sometimes into the following year. So it's one of the great characteristics of the apple. It has a high tannin for American dessert apples. It's one of the higher ones. It's mainly in the peel, but it's somewhat in the flesh. So this comes out when you're eating the apple, and it comes out in the juice. So my cider making philosophy is to use American cider apples mainly. These are the ones that historically were used to make cider all the way back to the 1700s. Arkansas Black is from the mid-1800s, but it's a seedling of winesap, which is a 300-plus-year-old apple, also used for cider. We have a winesap varietal as well. So that kind of brings around to what my feeling about this cider is. It's a mineral forward. Some people taste fruit notes in it. I'm not the best taster in the world, so to me it's more mineral forward. With the blend with the Pippin. Pippin is actually a very fruit forward cider, but it's covered over nicely with the Arkansas Black. So this presents to me as a mineral forward cider. All my ciders pretty much are dry. That's what I like. And I don't like additives in it, so you don't see any flavored ciders coming from Albemarle CiderWorks. There's plenty of those out there for people who like that. We prefer to produce an American cider, a dry American cider. Pairs really well with food. So if you have any questions about it, this one is around 7% ABV, has a residual sugar of 1 gram per liter, and it has a total titratable acidity of 5.4. That's kind of moderate for cider, but titratable acidity is what actually creates the acid sour flavor of cider. So you don't want it too much lower than that. So it's right in the middle of where we want it. So
I agree with you. It's not too tart. It's got a little minerality to it, not too sour though. It is very dry. It's been a while since I've had the 15 actually. We've been on the 16 in the tasting room, and it's interesting to go back and kind of taste the previous harvest year to what we've been drinking for the past couple months.
It's also, I might say, we don't pasteurize. We try to sterile filter our ciders so that they're stable in the bottle. This means anything. This is basically a 4-year-old cider. Started in 2015, was pressed probably in late 2015 or early 2016, and was bottled during the year of 2016. And we have moved through our 750 version. This one is in the 500, so we still have those in stock if anybody's interested.
So Michelle had asked if we were doing the 15. Yes, we started off with the Arkansas Black 2015, which is in the smaller bottle. For those who just joined us, Mary says hi. Hi, Mary. Mary Brigham.
Hi, Mary. Cheers.
Carol asked, what foods does this cider pair best with?
I use it with all food, so it doesn't get in the way of the food. And I mean, I've read you use sweeter cider with spicier food. I prefer this with all my food. I drink it every day with lunch, and I just like it by itself. It's a fairly low ABV for us, around 7. That's about as low as we get here in Virginia, and so you can drink more of it, and it's pretty good drinking, just sipping. So some of our other ciders are richer. We can talk about those on another.
Yeah. So
episode,
just trying to follow along on chats and things. So Mel had asked, do you think it's changed since the first time you tried it in 15? I personally think it's mellowed a bit. I think it was a little more earthy, a little more of that kind of mineral mushroom when we first were drinking it back in 17 and 18. And because it's mellowed a little bit, it's really nice and smooth, a little bit lighter as far as pairing notes, not pairing it with super strong or heavy foods, but things that are a little bit lighter. Bart and Megan, hi guys. Good to see you. And Brian.
He's there.
Yep, Brian's there. Jerry, a little bit of vanilla. There's a couple of our ciders that have that kind of, it's not a sweetness, but a little more of like a floral kind of vanilla note on the end. Definitely.
We do not barrel any of our ciders, so they're straight out of a stainless tank when we bottle them. What we found, we have cider from our first year, which was made in 2008, or from 2008 apples, and I'm still storing a little bit of it. And yes, it chemically changes. If it's put in the bottles reasonably sterile with very little sugar, we find that it's keeping very well. So yes, it will change chemically. I can't tell you exactly how. If there's tannins, tannins tend to agglomerate and form larger molecules and become more astringent versus bitter. So maybe that's part of the aging, but we don't intentionally age anything. So we're working through 1 year at a time here through our tasting room and through our distribution.
Leah asked if you remember what the growing conditions were in 2015.
I have no idea. I would say based on the ABV, it was lower, so it was probably a wetter year. That's typically what we see here. So, and we'll see the next one we're going to taste is a little bit higher. Arkansas Black is lower in sugar than some of the other apples we use. It's lower in sugar than the Albemarle or Newtown Pippin. So whenever we add Pippin, it's always going to bring up the ABV, which we don't really care about.
Yeah.
It's just going to be what it is based on the sugar that was in the apple that year. So the fact that it's 7 means it was probably a wet year.
Pretty wet year. Craig says hi. Hey, Craig. Michelle, yes, the button. So Michelle asked about, or says that she likes the button. Chuck's wearing the American Cider Association button, the new logo there. Great organization for cider makers and aspiring cider makers alike.
Drink cider.
They do a lot for us and have been super helpful during all this craziness for the past couple weeks. Let's see here, Ross, hi. Will asked, what yeast did you use with the 2015?
Oh, gosh. I would have to go hunt that up. If we can do that later for you if you want to know. At that point, I was probably moving into, I use wild yeast sometimes and do wild ferments. I don't know what I did on this one.
We had started out using DV10 as a champagne yeast, and so a lot of our earlier stuff had...
I kind of evolved through several of the yeasts. Back when I started, there were 3 yeasts that Scott Labs recommended, and I had an advisor that was helping me select yeast. So we picked 3 yeasts that they recommended. One was EC 1118, which is a traditional champagne type yeast. DV10 is another one. I gravitated, based on a conversation with Diane Flint, to DV10 because it tends to produce maybe a less harsh aroma in the cider. EC 1118 can produce more hydrogen sulfide, which is a detractant, but and I also used VIN13 from Anchor yeast, which is South African, and through the years they started recommending more and more their yeast for cider. So cider's become more of a focus for Scott Labs and Lallemand, I guess. They're the yeast manufacturer. So I moved on to a couple called, one is Cross Evolution. I use that a lot. I may have used it on one of these. I used Elixir, was another Scott Labs yeast, and there's...
They're getting creative with the names.
Yeah, there's, I used Anchor Alchemy. Alchemy 1 is the one they recommend. And I've moved now to several more, so we can talk yeast in another episode of this or somewhere else, but I really don't know. But I did, if I used one, it was a Scott Labs yeast, and it was probably at this time Evolution or Alchemy 1.
So Carol had 2 questions that are kind of related. So how long will cider last in storage, and what's the best way to store cider at home?
So what I have up at the house from our first year is in our basement. It's in kind of a root cellar, which is around 60 degrees or a little below, and it's stored real well. I'm still consuming that occasionally, what's left of it, and if it was reasonably sterile when it went in there, it's still good. So don't try to store cider for 10 years, though. That's a good idea.
We do it for experimentation purposes.
If the cider is not 100% sterile in the bottle and they're sugar available, you're going to ferment and change the character of it, and sometimes that can be okay, but sometimes it's just rotten. So, and if there's air in there, you're going to produce vinegar eventually. So, so far I haven't done that. Knock on wood.
Yeah. I would say the length of time, the biggest changes that happen in the bottle, as far as we can tell of our ciders, the acid breaks down a little bit. So there's our ciders tend to have a little bit higher acid. So drinking straight after bottling, it's a little sharper, and it mellows a little bit. And there is kind of a peak around that 3 or 4 year mark, and then past that, it just gets a little thinner, not as flavorful.
But to answer your question simply, we're selling and serving with some success ciders at 3 to 4 years in the bottle. That's not necessarily what we're trying to do. Generally they say cider's consumable after 6 weeks in the bottle when you get rid of bottle shock. And then beyond that, drink your cider in 2 years. But if you've got a good one that you want to hang on to, you can keep it 3, 4, 5 years if it's sterile. And doesn't have oxygen exposure.
Yeah. So next question, Ben Watson. Hey Ben.
Hello.
Good to see you virtually. How do you compare your Arkansas Black with your Black Twig? I've never tried them side by side.
They're similar. The first Black Twig we did was probably our best because we had 100% Black Twig, and to me that had more, it had spicier notes in it than Arkansas Black even. We haven't been able to score a complete batch for our subsequent Black Twigs. So our Black Twig that we're marketing right now is actually about 65% Black Twig. The other 30% is like 2/3 Arkansas Black and 1/3 wine sap. All related apples. They all present to me a mineral forward cider. So I like Black Twig, so I drink it right behind this one. I would say that there are other ciders we do like Harrison and Hughes Crab that just stand out, and to me those are sipping ciders, and I drink more purposely. I drink this one with meals, and I also drink it at happy hour. So.
Well, just to move along just slightly, we can go ahead and open the 16. Hi, Erica. Hi, Deborah. Jerry asked, following up on the aging and when it's best, I have some Hughes Crab that I was aging a bit longer. Did I make up that particular cider will age better? I love the Hughes.
We drank our last bottle of Hughes last year, and it was still very good. It had probably improved with age, but that one in particular, and Harrison, those ciders can age. It's just like red wine.
They have a little higher alcohol content.
They have higher alcohol content. They have higher tannin levels. They're a richer juice to begin with. So, yeah, I would if it's put in a bottle sterile with little oxygen contact, that cider is good for who knows, at least 10 years, because we've done it. But I'm not advocating that. So go ahead and enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
In the 6th year.
Hey, Erica. Good to see you. Mel asked, what time is
5 o'clock somewhere. So when I'm bottling, I taste. When I eat lunch, I have a cider with it. Generally, we knock off here around 4:30 or 5, sometimes a little later. We usually have a little bit of cider then as well. So, I don't know. It's whenever you really want one. If you're working outside and it's hotter than Hades, and have a cider, it's good.
That's I was going to say, yeah, Mel, you're in, is it Minnesota? You're probably in a different time zone there, a little earlier. We didn't think about that when we scheduled this. And you too, Michelle. Michelle said the CCC pairing program, which ACA puts on, the American Cider Association, recommends pairing these with sliced pears that have a high minerality or almonds or both. Yeah, I mean, I think they're a little lighter. I think that would go really well. I missed one question up here. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, good. Yep, perfect for Minnesota. So next one here is our 2016 Arkansas Black.
Just tell your boss it's 5 o'clock.
You're doing market research. So what are your notes on this one, Chuck?
So 2016, the ABV is 7.7, so it's a little bit higher. The residual sugar is less than 1, so it's maybe slightly drier. The titratable acidity is very similar, maybe a little higher. So I don't know. I kind of rolled right into the other one. So
I think this one's a little fruitier, has a touch higher acid. I actually prefer this one to the 15, although I think Chuck preferred the 15 to the 16. Really nice and smooth.
I prefer the one I have in my hand.
Well, there's that.
So.
see.
Oh, yep. Yeah, a little less mineral, more fruit forward. Almost like a white cranberry or a tart cranberry note to it.
C'est possible.
Obviously just pairing with the charcuterie board.
Oh, one of our staff members, Bobby, suggests pairing it with a charcuterie board.
Thomas Burkett says that he misses you, Chuck.
Oh, hi Tom.
Who?
I haven't been following on Instagram as well on who's signing in and not, so hi, Tom Burkett.
Hey, Tom.
There's a lot of phones behind the scenes.
I know, we're on two different platforms here trying to, make. Jerry prefers the 15 over the 16.
Chuck's like, I'm not sure, let me try it again.
Behind the scenes here is our tasting room manager, Alex. She's the one who got us all set up on both platforms and going live for us. She is socially distanced at 6 feet away, not in front of the camera.
Responding to comments.
She's responding to comments, so she's our behind the scenes guru. So Chuck, what did you do before cider making?
Just before, where do you want me to start? Let's just bring us up, like, I was born in Virginia, in Lynchburg, which is an hour south of Charlottesville, or North Garden. I grew up in Amherst County until I was 12. Our family moved to Charlottesville in 1961, where I finished high school. I went off for 2 years of college at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and I came back because I didn't like it there. So I came back to finish at the University of Virginia in 1972. I worked for a year to 2 years in marine biology labs, in which my training at UVA was environmental science. So I worked at 2 marine labs in North Carolina, and then I went to NC State in essentially aquatic biology, and got a master's degree. I worked for 1 year at a consulting firm in Wilmington, North Carolina after that, and which is where my wife is from. She's from Brunswick County, North Carolina. And those jobs, that was a terrible job. Like, if you think it's bad now, that was probably the worst job market I've ever seen. So there weren't any biology jobs that paid anything. So it was right after 3 Mile Island. I worked at a nuclear plant. And I worked for 22 years, I think, as a radiation control technician. And actually retired there in 2005. And at that point, we had actually started our little app business here in the mid-90s, and I kind of rolled right into orchard. Sometime during the ensuing 12 years when we started orchard, we decided to make cider. And since I had a science background, so cider making is science, so I rolled into that and took the Peter Mitchell course in 2006, and we started our operation here in 2008. Our first year, we opened in 2009 in July, and we're in our 11th year. So I hope that tells you where I am.
Brings you up to date. I had a couple of questions come in. Whitney asked, what are your top 3 favorite apples?
Ooh.
For eating or for cider making? Because those are 2 different things.
Yeah.
I guess that's the answer for both.
So eating, we grow them here, a few of them. We grow 250 varieties. That was where we started this whole operation, Virginia apples, and we kept planting apples. I don't know if I hate to even mention it, but our kind of guiding force in putting our orchard in was Tom Burford, and he just passed away this past weekend. So we have a big empty spot here. But he brought us to a lot of these apples. So for eating, You cannot beat, in my opinion, Newtown Albemarle Pippin. That was one of Jefferson's favorites. He also liked the Sub Spitzenberg. We can't really grow that here. Fire blight just eats it up, but it's a really good apple if you can grow it. Ashmead's current. I like a lot of acid in my fruit, so that is probably one of my number one choices. And then a modern apple kind of creeped in there called Gold Rush. Actually grows fairly well around here, and yeah, we make a single variety cider of both of those.
And Ashmead's, we just did a cider maker's choice batch 4 with rusted apples.
Right.
And Ashmead's was
And I would do it all with Ashmead, I think, but and other people have done it, but just for eating out of hand, yes. With cheese, they're just good eating apples. For cider, we have 2. Fortunately, thanks to Tom, Virginia Crab, which originated here back in the early 1700s, and Harrison, which originated in Newark, New Jersey, what is now Newark, New Jersey, and was Harrison, New Jersey then, are, in my opinion, the 2 top cider apples that were ever produced anywhere in the United States, and possibly the world. They are certainly in the top 10 in the world. They have, besides high acidity and flavor, they have a certain amount of tannin that it just produces a rich juice that's beyond anything else we can produce here. So Newtown Pippin, Albemarle Pippin was used for cider. We use it and do a single variety. Gold Rush, a very high sugar level and produces a very strong alcohol cider. We could go a lot into that.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of
We'll do a
others,
whole
but-
episode on apples. That might be. These are going to be forthcoming. We've got another one scheduled for 2 weeks from now with Charlotte, just on the history of cider. Keep an eye out for that. Michelle said that she also was a marine biologist.
I think I heard you say that once, but I hope you had better opportunities than I had, because
Well, she also did end up in the cider industry.
that's true. So they're related fields.
They are, there you go. They're both liquid in science, right? Will said, I get the cranberry notes. Seems lighter and brighter acidity than the 15. Yeah, I think it's not as mineral, and so it goes down for me a little bit smoother, for sure.
Telescopes.
Nikki says, love the story.
Likes your vest.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. So we did start this whole venture about 10 years ago, but was there something specifically that drew you to cider?
So we started producing apples here. We started planting in around 1993, I think. 92, the year kind of escapes us. But we had been to my sister Charlotte had been to an apple tasting up at Monticello, which they do every year, and the host, or the presenter there, was Tom Burford, along with Peter Hatch. And she experienced a bunch of different apples that Tom presented and tasted, and ended up buying 20 or 30 trees from Tom Burford's nursery in Amherst. And we planted those in the subsequent winter, and he took me up the next year to the same tasting, and I got to experience it. So we compared our notes. Tom presented 50 apple varieties, and they weren't all the best, because apples are good at one moment in time, and they're either getting there or they're going downhill afterwards. So, and some stay better longer than others. So you've got to give and take a little bit when you're tasting an apple, but we selected another 10, 15 varieties, and our orchard by that time had reached 40, 50 trees of 30 varieties. And in the subsequent 5 or 6 years, we pretty soon were up to over 200 varieties, and we expanded to a 4 or 5 acre orchard. We're around 12 acres now. We've kind of cut back on variety expansion. We still have over 200 varieties. we're focusing on some other newer apples, or for us, newer apples like Redfield. We have should I say a red flesh cider coming out. It's not Redfield, but it's red flesh cider, and it's a very small batch. It'll be coming out later this year.
So kind of with all the varieties and how we kind of started playing around with cider, question was by Bobby, what's your philosophy when making cider? And I think those two are kind of tied together. Just what different varieties of apples are available?
You use the best apple you can get, and you have to kind of taste those things. To me, I'm not. There is no science for picking apples for cider. I mean, there is. They've done science in England on English cider varieties, but when I taste an apple and it has a really nice acid sweetness balance, and I can black twig. I just like it, and I think it makes a great cider. So, but there's a long history of this too. Winesap was a cider apple in the pre-colonial, pre-colonial, even the early 1700s. Used crab as a cider apple. So I use a certain amount of juice that we get from our friends up in New Hampshire, Steve Wood and Steve and Louisa at Farnham Hill or Poverty Lane Orchard. So we have blended that into some of our ciders. They do a good job of growing it. It doesn't really grow here. So
Well, like the Sopa Spitzenberg that we have so much trouble growing.
But we haven't gotten the Sopas yet, but it makes a great cider. But that's my philosophy. So I am first and foremost, to describe myself, I am an American cider maker. I make cider from American apples, ones that are traditional here. Gold Rush is not, but Gold Rush, if it had been in 1700, would have been an outstanding heirloom apple. As it is now, it's an outstanding modern apple. So you can use any apple you want to make cider, but there are certain ones that just stand out to me, and those are the ones I've selected. At some point, we just have to curb our enthusiasm, and we will stay with what we got.
We like testing out new apple varieties for
But
sure.
we have another variety. We already knew that it was a great cider variety. I've tasted it from other cideries, and we just happened upon a source for Wixon this year. So that's another one that's coming out.
There's a handful of Redfields in the red flesh, according to David.
Yeah, there's about 2 bushels, and we've got more planted, but and eventually we got some other orchards that actually put some in, and we eventually may have a 100% Redfield cider, which they've done at West County and Massachusetts and some other places. So, and there's other red flesh apples, but and they generally have the same characteristic. They're very tart and astringent, and they make a nice pretty color, so it really attracts people. So
Yeah. So I would say then philosophy is just looking at what the apple can provide and trying out different varieties and seeing how they turn out for single varietals, and keeping it kind of 100% apple. There's some discussion of cheese and cider on the chat right now.
Gail is in here.
Because Gail is here.
hey,
Hi,
Gail.
Gail. Gail is a good friend of ours from over in Esmont, Virginia, just a little bit east of here. And she makes some of the best goat cheese in the world, in my opinion.
Red Row.
Also Red Row, which is Chuck's favorite. But definitely the best in the area. And she's signed on for us with Caramont cheese. Michael, good to see you. Will, yes, Wixon, we're excited about that one. It's just a nice acid bomb punch in the mouth, but we're hoping to release it in July. We're working on a label right now. Yates cider. Ross asked if we had ever made a Yates cider.
We have Yates. We use Yates. There's not a lot of Yates grown in Virginia. We've combined, early on we did an experiment. Ben Watson may remember this. We combined Yates and Harrison, and it did a very incredible cider. Yates is a floral aromatic apple. Yates is one of the parents of, no, Yates, I'm getting too mixed up, but the North Georgia apple. There are some in North Carolina. I've tasted a Yates single variety cider at Appalachian State when they did a seminar there. If you got Yates, go for it. It's good blended. It may even be a good single variety.
David says Yates is a delicious apple, and we put quite a bit of it in our 2019 Jupiter's Legacy.
So for those who just joined us, we're working on 2 different platforms here. So we're trying to keep everyone updated on both. So on the Instagram platform, our assistant cider maker, David, has been chiming in, and he says that Yates has been in a lot of our 2009, or a lot of Yates went into our 2019 Jupiters.
All of what we had, but
Yeah.
but we have probably 30 trees now. 30 trees on M111. If we get full production 1 year of 5, so we'll get what? 5 times 30, 150 bushels, and we can have a single variety. As yet, we haven't done it. So, Jupiter's Legacy is one of the first ciders we made. If you look at the label, it says we have like 20 or 30 varieties in it, and that's true because everything that's cider worthy coming out of our orchard goes into that. Most of it goes into Jupiter's Legacy. And we blend some other stuff in with it. We used to use, again, the Farnham Hill juice from Poverty Lane. We've been getting some Dabinet that we've grown in Virginia recently, and that's been going in.
We got a question through just direct message. Are you able to see an apple tree flower and know what type it might be? That's a little difficult.
I can tell you if it's a red flesh, because they're all like deep pink. They just stand out.
I think there's a little bit.
Beyond that,
There's a little bit with bloom time, but apple blossoms are not too different from one another. You can maybe tell a crab versus a not crab by the number of blossoms, but it's not necessarily. It's a little more difficult than that. It's easier to base it off of the fruit rather than the blossom.
I can tell by the bark more easily than I can the flower. But generally, it's if I see I'm looking at the orchard now. And I'm looking at a doggo that's in flower, and it's been in flower. I'm looking at my 2 rows of Hughes crab out here. They're all in flower right now. And my sprayer is almost ready to work because flower means fire blight in this area. So my mind's in 2 places right now, but anyhow. So no, I don't think I could. There are people that might. But most apples tend to have they start with pink and they open up and they're either white, all white, and like the doggo is pretty much all white. So others have, like Hughes, might have pink on the tips. So you might be able to tell those 2 apart. But, and if it's a red flesh apple, it's a deep pink.
Michelle asked if the orchard is blooming right now. And yeah, we're about 25-30% the way in. A lot of our crabs have already bloomed. We're still waiting on some later varieties though, so still working on that. And then Michael chimed in and said, yeah, wicks and crabs are starting to bloom here, or in Pennsylvania.
Wixon's is one of the later crabs to bloom for us, but it's blooming out. We have one called Nelson crab. That's the harbinger. When that comes, you know it's here because it blooms first every year, and then pretty soon after that we have Hughes and Dogo came out first, and then Hughes, and then our Geneva crab, which is a red flesh, is blooming out in the parking lot, and actually our Redfield is blooming, so it's right up in there with the crab apples.
We're currently sitting in a room that we call the orchard room because it's got windows, except for the fireplace, which is behind us, the walls, and so we're currently looking out at the orchard. Jerry said rode our bikes out that last weekend, and the trees were so beautiful. Yeah, Jerry, they're coming in. You probably saw the peach blossoms maybe last weekend, or the hues were just about to come out. And Nikki asked, why does flower mean fire blight?
Fire blight is a bacteria. It's one of the most pernicious diseases in the southern United States, all over the place, but for apple trees. It doesn't affect peaches. It gets on pears and plum fruits, really. It gets on quince. It can kill the tree. It can cause the apples on the branch to rot. And it needs a source of entry into the interior of the tree to get into the fluids that are flowing up and down through the tree. So in a young tree, you have to really protect it because it can kill it. If it gets to the root, it'll kill the tree. And then it's just ugly looking. If you come out here in the summer after you've had a bad fire blight year, you see what's called shepherd crooks, and you see shoot. It gets into the shoots, tender shoots, but the prime entry time is during bloom. And if you're not a organic orchard, which I don't know how you can be around here very easily, but you spray streptomycin. It's a bactericide. So, and the copper is actually used. We use a lot of copper compounds to help control it, and you prune it out. But it just gets into
Yeah,
apples.
so as Chuck said, the blooms create an entry point, especially as bees and other pollinators are moving from blossom to blossom. So it's when it spreads in the orchard.
Some varieties like winesap and Arkansas Black are more resistant, don't get it as bad. Hughes crab, unfortunately, gets it, and it's blooming. And it has to be warm during bloom, so bacteria spreads when it's 60 degrees. So right now we're hitting a really prime period, and I'm looking out there and saying I need to be out there. But
you're here with us.
I'm here drinking cider, but fortunately it's been cooler at night, and if it's below 60 degrees, bacteria doesn't grow, so we have some things we can kind of play off against one another. But yeah, that's a lot, that's as well, so just...
Well, Will says that just starting to bud out in New York, so just a little further north than us. Michelle says, for anybody that didn't know, CiderCon 2022 is in Richmond, Virginia this year. And yes, we hope that there will be a tour that includes us. If not, we're just an hour and a half west of Richmond, so easy.
1 hour.
Depending on where you are in Richmond, but easy drive out.
Well, your dad does 1 hour.
Easy drive out, and but I think the plan is to do a trip out this way towards Charlottesville.
And we have other people around too. Should have mentioned.
Oh, the other people in the room. So we do have Alan.
No, we have 5 cideries.
Oh, 5 cideries. We do have 5 cideries.
It's not just a...
We've already emptied both bottles.
No, we're almost emptied ours as well.
We're in the cider hole of Virginia here.
Yeah, so we've got 5 other cideries around the area. We've got Bryant's, we've got Bryant Small Batch, Bold Rock Hard Cider, Blue Toad Hard Cider, Potter's Craft Cider, and Castle Hill Cider, all just in this area. And then in Richmond, which is where CiderCon will be, you've got Busky Cider, Blue Bee Cider, and Courthouse Creek, all down there. And so we've got quite a bit of cider. Well, Bryant's has a second tasting room that way. But Brian asked, is it bad that we've already emptied both bottles? And no, we've almost finished ours as well.
I still got another glass here.
Let's see. Nikki asked, good to know, Baby Hughes. Yeah, it's pretty obvious what it is. And if you don't want to spray, you can cut it out. Fire blight, that is, in the orchard. But there are certain sprays that Virginia Tech puts out.
So there's other things you can use. Maybe if you're trying to not use, well, you can actually buy streptomycin at Southern States. But if you're trying to be organic, that's not approved. You can use copper compounds, so Bordeaux mix. I use one called Quava, which is organic approved, and
there's a whole guide on Virginia Tech on home orchard in this area and what sprays you can spray for different things. Megan has already moved on to Black Twig.
Cheers.
Michael is really excited about CiderCon. Whitney, oh, yes, so CiderCon is the industry conference for cider producers, people who work at cideries, people who are wanting to make cider. And there's just a lot of great information, great networking that goes on. We just got back actually at the end of January. CiderCon this year was in Oakland. It's the first time
It was early February, a minute ago.
I got out there January 31st, I think. But it was a great time to see everyone. Let's see. Do you know if any of these sprays are beehive safe?
Streptomycin I don't think would affect bees. I don't think copper would. It's not there. You don't spray insecticide when you have bloom.
And there's also the time of day. You usually spray at night because the
Well, that's one way of doing it. I'd spray at night. There are certain, the one that, insecticide that we use is supposedly bee friendly. I don't think you can get it unless you are approved, have a license to spray. It's called, used to be called a sale. I don't use it much. I don't use it during bloom. And I use oil or Nemex, which is an organic approved, but that's not bee safe necessarily. So I spray at night, and generally the bees are in the hive, and if it's not a persistent pesticide, it's going on to everything out there.
We just got bees. You just put them in this morning, right?
I have 2 hives.
So we have 2
installed this morning.
hives that we've had for a couple years, and but we just got a new pack this morning, and so we're definitely concerned about that part.
But
Jerry?
most fungicides, which is, cedar rust for us, bactericide, fire blight, that's not really going to affect the bees, I don't think.
Jerry, great for you to join us. Thank you. Looks like she is social distant cider sharing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. And yes, Mel, CiderCon is also for enthusiasts, for those who are interested locally.
We miss you too, Deborah.
Oh. Deborah says, thank you for taking such good care of the fruit and yourselves.
Well, I spray at night. Bees are inside at night, for one thing. If you're thinking strictly about bees. The other reason you spray at night is the wind tends to die down around after 4 o'clock, 5 or 6 o'clock. So you want your spray to go right on the orchard where you're spraying it. So, plus there's other reasons too, but those are the 2 main reasons. You don't have people around, like workers that are working here during the day, so I'm here by myself and I can go out in the orchard and I don't have to worry about someone else. But the wind is at its lowest between the hours of 4 and 7 o'clock in the morning. That's true for spraying and for fire. So
you're not spraying that late. Usually though, it's like between 8 and 12.
Well, I could, in order to do that, but I try to get mine done so I'm not keeping the neighbors awake after like midnight. So, but that's the reason. And bees are inside at night. So,
Alex just mentioned again, yes, we're doing another one of these in 2 weeks. Some more history on cider with some more historical cider varieties with Charlotte. Apple honey butter.
apple honey butter. Apple honey.
What do you mean, Megan? Apple honey butter.
Okay. So apple honey. I don't know how you can determine if it's apple honey. Yeah, it's by an orchard. You would have to take the honey out during the flowering period so I don't know where that would occur. Maybe in Washington State. They could take honey out after the flowering when they have a huge amount of orchards. Generally the bees are going to them, and so right now we have red bud coming out, are in bloom. There are other things that are in bloom. The maple trees just bloom, so yeah, it's hard to say what the honey flow is actually is, but yeah, there's apple in it. When I took honey in North Carolina, when I had hives down there, they called it gallberry honey because there was so much of this blueberry type bush blooming that right during the spring that you could take the honey out in June, and it was really dis-
No, we're just getting comments, Leah and Alex, actually, both like
Was my
16 over
philosophy?
15.
was my philosophy.
No, that was an earlier question.
Okay.
We're wrapping up though. We wanted to keep this under an hour, happy hour, and I know there's some other events, especially locally, that are some other cider events happening here starting at 6. So just wanted to wrap up again. Thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned multiple times, 2 weeks from now we're doing this again with Charlotte, my aunt, and Chuck's sister, with Harrison, Pippin, and Jupiter's Legacy. It's our bottle bundle for the month, and so you can order that online and join us, or just grab your favorite cider. The is those 3 ciders for $45, which is at, I think, how much of a discount? Is $10 off all 3 together? So looking forward to that. Thank you all for joining us, and cheers.
Cheers. I'm flattered that you would even want to listen to me, but if you've learned anything,
That's good.
that's
And we're,
great.
yeah.
I love you all.
Thank you all for joining us.